Hey everybody, just wanted to let you know that if you're interested in Wild West Exodus after listening to this podcast, good news. We're selling it on our website. Check it out, thefifthtrooper.com. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Fifth Trooper podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Fifth Trooper podcast. My name is Jay Shalansky and my co-host is Evan Bulris.
Hey, how's it going?
On today's cast, we have Chris Pond joining us from War Cradle Studios. They are the studio that does Wild West Exodus. How's it going, Chris?
Very good, thank you. It's lovely and warm over here today.
Same here, yeah. So we're in northern New York, so upstate New York, and the weather has just been phenomenal. So
yeah, actually, it's been pretty good.
We're finally past winter, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Chris, why don't we first start, I guess, letting our audience know what you do over at War Cradle.
So I'm the assistant studio manager over here, which essentially means I kind of run the studio on a day-to-day basis, but I also am heavily involved in the game development, getting involved in events, running demos, these kind of interviews, talking to people about the game, promoting it, and getting people playing it.
Awesome.
Well, that sounds like a fun job.
Yeah, it does actually.
It is very much.
So why don't we, since we have you here and you are, you're deeply entrenched, why don't we have you explain just a brief explanation of what Wild West Exodus is for us?
Well, Wild West Exodus is a steampunk alternative history skirmish war game. It's set in 1870 something in and around the Old West. And we have we've got Lawman, we've got Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, we've got outlaws such as Jesse James and Billy the Kid, we've got Gustav Eiffel, we've got General Grant, maybe a slightly different General Grant, but we've got all these characters. We've got Abraham Lincoln in there. We've got stuff that really tweaks at the historical kind of Wild West steampunk feel, but we've also got robots and aliens and werewolves and you name it. There's something for everybody in here. We've got 8 factions, and it really covers as many tropes as we can fit in to this type of game, so that there is, like I say, something for everybody.
So let me ask, this is an interesting question. I was thinking about this. So you guys are UK based.
That's right.
So how steeped, like our culture over here in the US, like the Wild West is, I mean, you can't really like walk 2 feet without tripping over something Wild West, right? And like
a restaurant or something.
Yeah, like understanding, and it's kind of just steeped in our culture. So for you guys over there, how into the Wild West are people, and how much do they know about it in general?
Well, a lot. I mean, it's fairly universal culture thing over here. We all grew up watching spaghetti westerns and the Clint Eastwood and John Wayne, all those types of old movies that are always shown on a Sunday afternoon, especially when I was growing up as a kid. So we all of us here at the studio are big fans, and it's and in some ways actually it's a bit more exotic for us because it's not, we don't trip over it at home. It's a little bit more removed for us, and it's a little bit more fantastical because it's gotten very little to do with our day-to-day environment, which I think is why those types of films and that type of genre is particularly enticing to people who aren't immersed in it. But actually, we purchased the game from a company that was US based, actually in Arizona, just outside of Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
And we had a strong relationship with Outlaw Miniatures at the time, and they expressed to us that they were interested in possibly selling up and doing some other things. and we expressed an interest in getting into a game and producing our own game and re-injecting some new life into Wild West Exodus and bringing a second edition to it, and the rest is history. So nearly 4 years ago now, we picked up the game, and we've been running with it ever since.
Yeah, and so I kind of brought that up because in my mind, I almost feel like even though we're steeped in the culture over here, right? Like it's our history over here. Based on what you said, is exactly why, like, I really think having like a UK based company take over is better for a game like that, because for instance, like whenever I've traveled or people have come over here and I've talked to them, like if they haven't been to America before, like their whole thing is Route 66, right? Like
The rockabilly.
yeah, I want to get on a motorcycle and I want to drive across Route 66 and see the US. And it's like this fantastical like thought in their head that, seeing all of the US and for those of us have driven across the US, it's not as fantastical like as you're doing it. And so yeah, I really like this kind of idea that it's almost it's kind of like castles for us. We're like, we don't have castles here. So like knights and castles and
super cool.
Yeah. And like we dream of dragons and all that, so it's very interesting to me. And I'm excited about, those kind of like cultural, almost like views of something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like science fiction, isn't it? It's anything that's removed far enough from the norm is fantastical and inspires you to dream about these amazing adventures that you can have in a place that is just so different to what you're used to and your own reality. And essentially this is largely no different from science fiction or fantasy in that respect, because it is so different, and what we've done is, we've created this world that kind of exists outside of our history. It's actually a completely different timeline to ours. Mm-hmm. Our grant is Odysseus grant, as an example. So it's very, very different. The technology is very, very different. There's power sources that enable these amazing weapons of destruction to exist, and it then leads you to create a world that is easier to explain all these conflicts, because it's a war game essentially at the end of the day, and you're telling stories about conflict. So you have to engage, you have to find a catalyst for that, and in an environment like the Wild West, where you have this lawless kind of almost dystopian society that exists way outside of anything that we would normally encounter, means that you can do that really easily. And then you add zombies and werewolves and aliens. And all of a sudden, it's amazing, and you've got every opportunity to create these these stories.
So let me ask this: in the history of the back story of Wild West Exodus, was it all normal, and then there's like a divergent something that happened in the timeline that made it diverge, or is this a completely different kind of, let's call it, dimension, right? Like a separate Earth?
It is. I mean, they're one of the biggest changes, like I was saying about with these power sources, and the one that's prevalent in Wild West Exodus is RJ 1027 or Juice, or whatever people call it. Mm-hmm. Essentially, this liquid that provides energy, and it's a catch-all MacGuffin. So we don't define it. We don't actually say how it works.
Right.
It's almost cooler that way, right? So you can kind of just feel how you want it to work, right? Like in your mind, it does the old thing.
Somehow it's in bullets. It's it allows artificial intelligence of a certain limit to exist. It allows robotic dogs to run around with their own their own volition, and all manner of crazy stuff. So it is just a way to kind of inject some level of super science into the world.
Now, from a creative perspective, I think sometimes creatively that it's harder to design when your whole world is open, right? When there's no rules, you can do anything. Sometimes it's harder to come up with ideas. So do you guys put any sort of like world rules in place that when coming up with new characters or new units or new kind of like ideas that they have to operate within a certain rule base, or is it just kind of open to whatever you can imagine?
Well, it's thematic. So we've got 8 factions, and within each faction has a theme. So the Union are militaristic, the Lawmen are full of character, and they're almost as bad as the Outlaws. The Outlaws are even more full of character and are broad, and you've got these historical references to people that may or may not have existed in the Old West. You've got the Watchers, who are aliens. You've got the Enlightened, who are the mad scientists who have these zombies and robots and creations and things that allow us to go a bit crazy with stuff. You've got the Warrior Nation, who are the Native American people, or representative of them. Again, they're not truly representational of any specific tribe. They're just I suppose a carbon copy, if you like, of that type of culture. But again, that allows us the more spiritual side of things, the more earthy kind of spirits, werewolves and other types of creatures that are the antithesis of the Enlightened, and they're all about super science, whereas the Warrior Nation are all about earth spirits and natural phenomenon. And so, we have, yes, the world is completely open and it is our own, but we've imposed our own rules. Right. And so, we therefore have to play within those boundaries. They're quite flexible, and of course they're quite large, so we've got a lot of room to roam around within each of those boundaries. But it means that it gives us that framework to build on. So if we're thinking, right, we haven't had very much love for the Watchers lately, let's think about something, and a new posse that we can bring out within the Watchers, and we'll start toying with some ideas, and we'll just bring up some general concepts. It tends to start with a trope of some description, and then there, we've got some posses who are tongue-in-cheek nods and homages to other kind of geek culture things that are pretty cool as well. So there's a lot of that goes on, and yeah, so you're right that if we did have absolutely no holds barred, it would be quite difficult to come up with stuff. But because we've created this world that we're playing around in, it means that we do have a framework to hang stuff off.
So, a little behind the curtain kind of question in development, when you were developing the game, or I guess when you continue to develop the game, something that we always wonder about as players and as podcasters is when I come up with an idea, when a company comes up with an idea for a table size. So how does that kind of process work on your end, as far as 2x2 up to 6x4? So what's the process for that?
Well, it's when we're a business, so there is it's not just about creating a cool game. It's not like I'm creating a game for me and my friends to play. There is also there are commercial decisions that need to be thought about when we're looking at a game, because it has to be commercially viable in order for it to sell well enough for us to earn money from it and continue as a business. So as a result, one of the key things that we consider every time we make a new game, or if we're creating something within the studio, is making it as accessible to as many people as possible. And our core demographic, we understand to be 25 to 35-year-old men who have a job and probably have a family. Therefore, they don't necessarily have the time. They have the spare money, but not the time to spend all day or an entire weekend playing a game. So one of the key things we wanted to do with Wild West Exodus, and one of the things that we've done with the other games we're in kind of production with right now, is making it as easy to pick up and play as possible. So actually with Wild West Exodus, we've given a lot of freedom to table size. If people want to play on a dining room table and it's 3 foot by 3 foot, then that's fine. You can play those types of games. And if you want to play a game that's over in an hour and a half of an evening because you're limited on time, then the game absolutely works at that level and works really well at that level. If you want to have a full weekend game and have tons and tons of miniatures on a much larger table, then you can go ahead and do that as well. So, we do spare a thought to trying to make it as accessible to anybody who wants to get into it as we possibly can, and make it as flexible so that we can catch as many customers as possible.
No, that's pretty cool. So every time I go to an event, I see like PAX Unplugged or Origins, I see the setup for Wild West. And I keep going over and being really upset that nobody in my area plays it, because I really want to buy it, right? I want to get into this game. But I've done that with like Arena Rex was one of the games I bought into. Then nobody just in my area wanted to get into. So I have these 2 Arena Rex armies just kind of sitting on a shelf. But I keep walking by, and let's say I was to just bite the bullet and, I'm going to buy 2 armies, to bring play, and I'm going to try to, beat the drum to get people into this game. What let's say we're just doing like a normal, I don't say normal's kind of a broad term. Let's say we're doing like for your time frame, like let's say like an hour and a half game.
Yep.
About how many miniatures in each side what am I about expecting per army?
It's
a bold question. I don't mean to just.
No, it's perfect. It's a perfect question, and it's something that we've thought a lot about. And actually, the way we release our products are in posse boxes, and not only are those posse boxes thematic in nature and create and contain a usable force that you can play right out the box, but that's the game that plays in an hour and a half.
Okay.
And that's the spot. So you go and spend, I think it's about $40 on a posse box, $44 it might be, and you've got yourself an army. That's all you need to start the game.
Oh wow,
and,
that's actually super reasonable.
Yeah, some 10-sided dice, the rule book, which is free online. All the cards are free online. So actually, you don't have to go and buy the Gubbin set, but in there you've got a physical rule book, you've got tokens, you've got the cards that you need to play the game. That is the one thing you have, which are the action and adventure decks. And then you can, that's it. You're playing the game.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. Like I said, I keep walking by, and so do you guys do like an OP structure?
Yes, we've got there are 2. The format comes in 2 flavors. The first one is the Gunslinger Slow Grow League, where you start off with a posse box, and then every week you add something to that posse until you've got a tournament ready list. So after cool. 6 weeks, you then build yourself up to a 1,200 point tournament list, and then your store or your club will then do a tournament day where you play 3 or 4 different games at a tournament level throughout the day or over the weekend, depending on how many players you've got. And that's the second flavor of it is just that tournament day.
So if I'm a new player, what do you recommend? Like, what should be the first thing I get?
Well, again, there are 2 ways to get into it. The first way, we've got a 2-player starter set called Gunfight at Red Oak. You get Jesse James versus Wyatt Earp. You got Frank James in there, Doc Holliday, some robot dogs, a jet bike, and a regular bike with some heavy cannons on it, and that's enough for 2 people to play a game right out of that box, and that again is $44. So it's a real easy way for people who are on the fence to go, look, that's 20 odd bucks each, and
that's not bad. Yeah,
we're playing the game. You get a rule book in there, you get the cards, you get the dice, the templates, the tokens, absolutely everything, and you can give it a go. And if you like it, you can then go and buy yourself. You choose a faction that you like, buy yourself a posse, and you build on it from there. So the other way.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say the other way is if you know what faction you want to get into, and you go, right, yep, I instantly the Union Army, that's for me. You can buy a posse set with Grant and a bunch of characters in, and you can just start playing with that posse, and then you can add. We've got a unit type that are called hired hands or hand units, and they're your nameless characters. They're your grunts, for want of a better word, your cannon fodder, and you can build on your posse with those. You can add some vehicles. You can add a different posse and mix and match those characters, and before you know it, you've got 2 or 3 factions and not enough time to paint them all.
Dude, for real, actually. I jumped on the website to take a look at the starter box, and I saw Roosevelt on a Raptor, and I am intrigued.
So he's our promo miniature for this year, and we've got a game called Lost World Exodus, which is the sister game to Wild West Exodus, and is set in the Lost World in the middle of Antarctica. Where you've got, tropical paradise with megafauna, megaflora, dinosaurs, all sorts of stuff going on, and all the factions from the dystopian age have converged on this haven of natural resources and alien technology, and are picking over the bones of it all. So it's that's a same system effectively as Wild West Exodus, but you've got all the factions from the dystopian age.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, actually, having that kind of bright. So one of my biggest complaints about wargaming in general is most tables are built to be kind of grimdark, and it'd be really like that setting to have like a bright, like flora and fauna and like bright, like the table actually looks like inviting, for a change instead of just like a destroyed city. Would be actually a lot of fun to play on.
You can absolutely let your imagination go wild. You can have enormous mushrooms and huge trees and rocky outcrops and bits of rough desert area. You can have whatever terrain you want, and it's going to be really fun creating that when we get that out.
Yeah, I really like too that. As part of kind of the whole thing that you guys not just do the minis in the game, but you also have the terrain that people could buy if they wanted to, work within your world and just have something easy to set up versus setting up their own. How does that play into when you're designing this stuff? Is it something that you kind of want to do in parallel with the minis in the game, or is it something that it was like, well, we want to provide terrain that's within the world in case people don't want to go make their own or something like that?
Yeah, again, it's about accessibility. And one of the problems with buildings in Wild West Exodus is the fact that, Wild West Exodus is a 35mm game. So any Wild West scenery you buy is typically going to be 25mm and probably a true 25mm as well. So the doors are going to look, come up to people's chests rather than than over their heads. So one of the things we realised was it was quite difficult to buy terrain that looked really good for Wild West Exodus. Mm-hmm. There's also the fact that you've got this steampunk feel to it, and none of that's represented in any of the the historical sets that are out there. So we decided that we would bring out our range of Wild West Exodus terrain that was in the right scale, but had the look and feel of this kind of dystopian Wild West setting that brings the game to life, rather than just it being something that, oh, this will do for the table today, guys. Actually, you've got a whole town that you can set up, and you can do part of a town and play a game on the outskirts, and just use the buildings as the edge of the playing table, the gaming table, and you can have rocks and cacti and gullies and gulches and all sorts of stuff to kind of obscure your troops and give your characters cover on the table. But again, when we've done some filming before, we've explored, because in the West, it's not just desert. There are all different types of terrain, and all different types of weather as well. So we've had snow-filled battles. We've had battles on rolling plains and grassland. We've got like I said, Red Oak, which is the kind of make-believe town we've created for the range of terrain that we've put out. But it means that, we've made it very accessible and very affordable without really losing the detail. So it's actually quite easy for somebody to get the whole town of Red Oak. And we've also just released Rio Sonora, which is kind of the New Mexico version. Not that New Mexico exists in the dystopian age, but the Sonora, which is the region that would be New Mexico, is set in. So you've got adobe buildings and that type of look and feel of a very different town, so that you've got different tables you can play on, because it can be quite dull if you're playing at home with the same people to just play on the same board all the time. You need to mix it up a bit, and especially if you're playing with different factions or you're playing with different posses, you want to generate that feel that every time you're playing it is a different game. And so having a variety of terrain really does make a difference.
So another question I had, do you, I think this happens with everything in the world, but specifically with gaming. So do you guys see kind of like a roller coaster, like a rise in purchases when something like Red Dead Redemption 2 comes out, or, if there's a movie or some sort of cultural phenomenon that brings us back to the Wild West? Do you guys see the result of that, or in general is your base pretty set and it's kind of dependent on word of mouth and in stores and stuff?
I mean, the wargaming industry is pretty niche. It is in its own bubble, so it doesn't tend to pick up on the mainstream trends as much as other things do. I suppose the answer is I don't think so. But actually, it's not something that we necessarily track the metrics on.
That's fair. Yeah, it's because when I watch like my father loves westerns, and that's actually what drove me to look at this game. So I got into first miniature game I got into was War Machine way back, and then it was X-Wing, and then Legion, and then I go to all these events. I didn't realize how many war games existed, because my little town, it's like it was like that was the 3 games you played, and then I walked over and I saw I was watching like over someone's shoulder a demo, and it was they're having a shootout, and I don't remember the models. I think it was Billy the Kid and Earp, I think. But they said a couple of those buzzword names that I really wanted to hear. So I'm like, well, what do we got going on? They had the buildings and everything. And I'm like, oh, yo. So because I'd just been burned on Rex. So I didn't jump in, but it was close, because I thought Romans would be big, but no one cared around here. But it turns out a couple of the guys have like Wild West armies the Wild West Exodus armies in the area from different events, and they just don't talk about it. So I was like, well, maybe I can weasel my way in with some making a nice table and try to get some people in. But it's just a really cool, like, every time I see it, I just get more of the models I look at here, I'm getting more invested in on making something with this.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, right? For you guys is how do you in like different areas who may, I think it's all dependent on stores or if the local crew has been to a show or not and seen this. So how do you guys really deal with that and think about from a marketing perspective getting the game and knowledge of the game out, besides stuff like this?
So it's all about community. That's the buzzword really for getting a game played, is building communities. So we have volunteers called war hosts, and they're our champions. They're the guys who love the game to bits and live, sleep, eat, breathe Wild West Exodus. And they, they're running events in stores. They do tournaments. They come to shows with us. They shout it from the rooftops on social media, and they're the guys who tend to have a bit of a following in the local store or club or community that they're in, and whatever they play, everybody plays. They draw people along with them. So, they're the guys that we give them all the tools they need to play the game and to get it played within, mainly stores and clubs. And if you can build that, then that's your customer base set up. It's more difficult in places where you don't have those clubs or you don't have a store, because then you're relying on a group of friends who have somewhere to play, typically one of the houses, and they always play host, and they're the one with the terrain and the table and room in the garage, and you go around there every week and you have a game, and usually it's difficult to then reach those people specifically, apart from things like this and social media and the shows. And that's why the shows are really big for us, because it's an opportunity for us to introduce Wild West Exodus, as you were saying about, you didn't know it existed, you walked past it and you saw some stuff you liked, and you draw people in. And you give them a demo and you show them how much fun it is. And one of the key things for me that I love about Wild West Exodus is it is an exciting game to play. There's a lot of stuff that can happen that you just don't foresee. There's card play with the action and adventure decks that you can't foresee. It's not just about a lucky dice roll, although that does come into it. But it is a roller coaster ride. And once people see that on the table and they experience it, they tend to, jump right in, which is great.
So before the cast, Evan and I were talking a little bit about how this is kind of right now we're living the golden age of board gaming. And so from a developer's perspective, how is that kind of, because I feel like that could be both positive and negative, right? It's positive because you got more people than ever playing tabletop gaming, but at the same time you have more games than ever. So as a developer, how do you think about that for the future releases and how it's going to entice people to choose your game?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to measure because what we're producing are effectively luxury items. People don't need toy soldiers. Some people. But you don't need them. They're not a necessity to survive.
Right.
And yeah, so you're right. There is a finite pool of extra cash for that our customers have that they're going to spend on games. But yeah, you are right that we are living in a time where it's so much more acceptable to play these types of games, and therefore that's another route in for players. Somebody who's introduced to board games at a friend's house and then suddenly has a board game collection, and then they go to a show and then they see that there are other different types of games out there, and that's their first experience of a tabletop miniatures game, and they love it, and they're quite artistic, and they realise they've got a flair for painting miniatures, and before you know it, they're their spare room has been converted into a painting studio, and they've got drawers and drawers of unpainted miniatures. And that's a great way of getting people into the game. But yeah, there is a finite amount of money that people are going to spend on a game, and one of the things that we've got a number of different games that we're bringing out. We've got a naval game called Dystopian Wars, which is set in the same universe, but is a game about enormous battleships fighting it out on the high seas with submarines and airships, and it's set in the same time as Wild West Exodus. You've got this weird super science and crazy technology going on that wouldn't have occurred then, but you have this style that's anachronistic and really cool and gets people involved. So that's another way, bit of diversity. We've actually got a board game in development as well, which is Bill and Ted's Riff in Time, which is
fantastic.
Earmarked for coming out later this year. So it's great to be able to work on that type of thing as well. I'd say it was excellent, in fact.
I thought that's what Evan was going to say, but he said fantastic, and I was slightly disappointed that we didn't get that in.
It's all right. I just got excited, so the first thing that came to my mind.
So along those lines, we found when we talk to people, and kind of combining the two thoughts there, is that sometimes we'll get gamers that have never, ever, ever touched a game besides Monopoly, and then they'll start playing a game because of the theme alone. Like Star Wars is a big pull for that, right? And I feel like with a Wild West or this new game, the new naval game with airships and stuff, that sounds super cool. That theme kind of could drive a non-gamer into becoming a gamer just that on that alone. So how does that affect where you guys go with your next games? You have Bill and Ted, that I have a feeling that's going to pull some people in, and I feel like Wild West Exodus has got to pull people in that have never played games before, and they're like, wait a minute, I can do a Wild West war game? Like, yeah.
I mean, to be honest, it's something that's kind of happened organically with us.
Okay.
So it's not something that we've really thought too much about. So, the Wild West Exodus thing kind of happened. And then there's a company over here called Spartan Games who made Dystopian Wars and another sci-fi battleship game called Firestorm Armada, space combat game called Firestorm Armada. And they went into administration, and we picked up those IPs as well. So, so actually we've, so far we've kind of been picking up things rather than going, right, let's have a look at the market and see, where there's a gap. We've not actually got to that point where we have to do that yet. So it's not really a question I can answer.
That's fair. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess it's good to be lucky, right?
Yeah, passion has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to make a game that you're not passionate about.
Right.
So a lot of it comes from inside, and therefore, I suppose if we were to be looking at doing a brand new game, we would probably have a big brainstorm session, and we'd come up, we'd throw some ideas out there, and we would probably naturally tend towards something that we all got excited about rather than anything else. And when you're excited about something, you make really cool stuff. As if you're running a game, or if you're running a role-playing game, for example, and you're writing your own campaign, you've got to be excited about what you're writing about, and you will take your characters along for the ride, because your excitement will draw them into the story. And it's the same for this game. When people come to see us at the shows, we're so excited about Wild West Exodus because we think the game's great. That enthusiasm is infectious, and it draws people along and go, "This is great." Whereas if you see an advertisement in a wargaming magazine, you might go, "Oh yeah, that looks interesting. It's cowboys, it's steampunk. Oh yeah, that's cool." But you might not think twice about it. So sometimes it's just about having that passion, and that passion drives your inventiveness, and that shows in the game. It absolutely does, I think.
Yeah.
I agree. I know, like every time I go to, I can tell when I go when I go to PAX Unplugged or any of these Origins or anywhere, I always stop at. I like demos because I like to see what's out there, and I can tell, like I can feel if they really care about it, like if this is their thing, or they're just like going through the motion. I get if it's like last demo of the day, the guy's burned. Like, hey man, I worked retail forever. I get it, but like I can always feel it, right? So I can feel like when I was watching that demo for your game, actually, I was a third party and I was getting pulled in, right?
Yeah.
Again, this was so long ago, I don't remember names or anything, but I remember the guy just being really excited about the game. I'm like, well, I'm excited now too, right? Like, so it's
Yeah.
it's always good to see that with a company that actually like really cares about the product.
But all right. Well, I mean, I think that kind of wraps it up for us. Chris, do you have anything else you want to share or tell us about?
No, I mean, that's really what I would say. If somebody was interested in getting into Wild West Exodus, check out your local store. Have a chat with the guys down there, see if anyone's playing it. If there's a war host around, they'll be happy to run demos for people. If you've got no one else in your area, have a look at being a war host. If you want to get a couple of factions and start getting people to play it, then there are things that we can do to help and support that. You can have a war host t-shirt, and you can come to some events with us, that type of thing. So at the moment, obviously, with this crazy situation we find ourselves in, we've missed out on a number of shows this year, which is a real shame, because they're real big things for us. And I love coming to the States, and I love visiting Chicago for Adepticon, and Indianapolis for Gen Con, and Philadelphia for PAX Unplugged, and all these great places, and meeting everybody. And there are some really amazing people in this industry. So it's a real shame not to be able to go out there and do that and introduce people to the games. But yeah, find people that are playing it. They're out there. We've got the Dark Council, which is a Facebook group, and that's actually really busy with people posting their painted miniatures, talking about the game, asking questions, finding loopholes in the rules that I have to scratch my head around for several hours and have arguments.
And then create your erratas.
Absolutely. It's like, damn, why did I not think of that? But it's difficult. And that's a really interesting thing about game design and development for me, is people will interpret things in all manner of different ways, and it's impossible to write watertight set of rules, because interpretation is a big part of what makes us human. We don't. It's not like a mathematical formula. When you're using words to describe how a rule works, those words are entirely up for interpretation. So two different people can read the same paragraph and come up with completely different interpretations of that rule. And there is absolutely no way to stop that. It's impossible. Games Workshop, for example, have been making rules for 30 odd years now. So, in fact, nearly 40 years. So, and they can't do it.
Right. Yeah.
So, what chance is there for the rest of us? And even in board games, where you have a very defined area to play in. You have a framework of rules that don't have the type of interpretation that you get in a war game, where you have 300 different units that have different interactions. You still get interpretations on rules that people aren't absolutely sure on, and you have to go back to the rule book and check it. But we try and make our games as intuitive as possible, with as few rules in the rule book as we can manage, and try and make the fun about how you play the game, rather than about how many rules there are. So,
sure.
And that's one of the key things, is trying to make it easy for people to pick up, but deep enough for people to keep their attention. That's the eternal struggle.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
This
definitely.
was great.
My pleasure. Anytime. If you wanted to, do a bit more of a focus on some of the factions and do some more
100%
in-depth
actually,
conversation, I'm more than happy to do some more.
Awesome.
Let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No worries, guys. Have a great weekend.
You too.
You too. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Join us next week for another edition of the Fifth Trooper podcast.
This has been a Fifth Trooper production.